Okay, recording now.
Okay, so our primary discussion today is about dubbing. And if you looked at the email that I sent out, you would have seen photographs of samples of dubbing that I had out on the table here in the living room. So I'm going to very quickly go through the types of dubbing that I have as a sample and give you a bit of a description of what the stuff is and what it gets used for. So the first thing that is, I have bought a number of these kinds of packages in the past that have a mix of colors of dubbing of a specific type. It's a little, I guess you could say it, maybe a little jewelry box container that has a whole bunch of holes drilled in it, and then it's packed with different colors of dubbing. This particular one is a Antron. Now, Antron is a synthetic, of course. The nice thing about Antron is that it keeps its color nice. It's not water soluble. It doesn't soak water, so it tends to repel water a little bit. And the fibers of the Antron are a little bit crinkly, and they tend to adhere well to each other. I use that primarily for small dry flies because it dubs really nice onto thread, and you can make a very, very fine dubbing with it. So that's Antron, and I'm going to start today by showing you how to do dubbing with fine dubbing, and it's just this straight manual method where you take the dubbing and you lay it on the thread, and then you pinch it between your thumb and forefinger and roll it onto the thread. You'll see there's not very much dubbing on that stuff. It's very thin. And that's one of the nice things about Antron is you can put it on very thin for if you're doing small flies. And that makes it possible to properly shape the body on a dry fly. Now this is actually a blue-winged olive. It's a size 14 hook. So what you like to do with these types of dry flies, this is a standard Catskill pattern, is you start very thin at the back. And the tail on this is actually moose mane to give it a little bit of natural flotation at the back. And that you can see that we're really not putting much onto that hook because these mayflies tend to be fairly skinny. So we're going to just keep going. And then as we go further forward, I'm going to build up a little more body thickness. And you can build the body thickness by wrapping back over the dubbing you've already done if it's thin enough. You don't have to taper the dubbing that's on the thread. And then as I get towards the thorax, I'll add a little more and make the dubbing rope just a little thicker. A little bit of spit sometimes helps. And I'm going to dub the thorax in the same material, but you can see I'm making the thorax about 3 times larger than the back of the mayfly, just a teeny bit more. And the thing with doing this is that it does take a little bit of time to do this. And I'm going to build a bit of a thorax here. So now you can see we've got that sort of cigar shape to the back body with a big thorax. Now, that's the nice thing about this really fine dubbing, is that it does that. It allows you to do that fairly consistently. If you use a coarser dubbing, you can't make that really fine body shape. Now I'm going to take a hackler just to finish the fly off because I don't want to have to cut all this off for to recover the hook. I've got just a standard grizzly hackle there. I don't know if you can see that against the white. And I've clipped the end of it so that it'll fit. I'm going to tie it on just behind the wing. The wing is just a little piece of andron tied on and stuck up in the air. And then I'm just going to wrap my hackle 2 or 3 turns behind the wing, and then 2 or 3 turns in front. I'm going to tie that off. And then I can trim the hackle out and whip finishing. So there's a blue-winged olive, and that's a size 14. I would tie these down to maybe sometimes an 18, 14, 16s. And that wing's a little long, so I just trim it off. So that's what you do with fine dubbing. Now I've got other grades of dubbing that come in these little boxes. And in order of how finely chopped it is and some of the different properties, this is Awesome Possum. It's a New Zealand product. They found a use for these miserable little Australian opossums that have invaded the country, and they turn it into fish food. Again, multiple colors. The nice thing about this stuff is it also is relatively fine, but it's a lot spikier. I don't know if you can see that. It's got a lot more longer fibers in it, but it still sticks together well. It's short fur and long fur that's been all chopped up. And for doing wet flies, that style of stuff is really nice because you can pack it down and leave it packed down, or you can pack it down and then brush it out. The next one up is, that's the Antron. That's the Antron, which I believe. The next one up is Squirrel Blend. I use this a fair bit, and it's from the back of a squirrel that has been chopped up and mixed in with a little bit of synthetic material to allow it to adhere stuff. Now, the squirrel stuff is also a little more spiky even than the possum. So, and it's got some synthetic in it that gives a little bit of a shine. And the next one up is this guy here, which is Davy Oaten's synthetic living fiber, it's called. And it's even coarser, and it's got more shiny stuff in it. Now, when you put them on the hook, they look kind of like this. So that is, let's take this one. Yeah, this one is the 3 types of dubbing I just showed you from back to front on the hook. And that's possum, followed by squirrel, followed by SLF. So you can see that and these have been roughed out. So you can see they're all the same color. You can see that this one's a little less spiky than that one. This one's a little more spiky than that one. And this SLF has got a lot more spiky bits. So you can make a choice on the dubbing based on how furry and how spiky and rough you want that material to be when it's applied to the hook. So that's those ones, and I use those boxes a fair bit. Next is stuff that came out of a Canadian dubbing company, Diamond Dub. I use these a lot for nymphs, a couple of specific nymphs in particular. And then some of them come as it's a similar product. It's got a heavier weight material in it. It's called Super Sink. That's a heavier material that allows the fly to sink a little better. So to give you some idea, and that's those two. That's Diamond Dub. And then after Diamond Dub, we get these other ones that are called.
Dave,
Yes.
did you order this stuff online? Because I've never seen it in Robinson. Well, I haven't seen. Yeah.
Most of it's been bought through the Fishing Hole in Edmonton. But yeah, you can find the stuff online. But there's also equivalents. And again, what I'm trying to get you is an idea of the range of dubbing that's available and what you're looking for in each type. So if you're looking for something that is for wet flies that has a natural look to it, that brushes out, you can pick a dubbing that has different qualities in terms of how spiky it is, how much synthetic or natural material has in it. And that you can use primarily for wet flies that are sort of a natural type fly. Or dry flies. The Antron stuff is probably the best stuff for dry flies because it doesn't have a spiky character to it. So the next stuff I got out, if I can find this stuff here, is called Ice Dub. And these are more along the lines of the synthetics that we're starting to see now. So there's a brown and tan Ice Dub. And before I go there, here's the Diamond Dub. So again, that's a synthetic. Get out here in the sun, you can see it. And it's got a fair bit of color to it. And again, it has a glint to it because it's synthetic material. So this is the Diamond Dub, which is, again, if you're dyeing woolly buggers and stuff like that, where you want a bit of shine in the body, you look for stuff that has this synthetic material that kind of glints in the sunlight. You can see how that looks. And then the other stuff is this ice.
Dave, sorry to interrupt. Do you not find that that's much harder to actually put on the thread?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I struggle with that.
But we'll go through that in a minute. And then there's the real crazy stuff, which is this stuff here, Flashaboo dubbing. And then there's this pink laser dub. And these have a lot of synthetic material, not a lot of stuff to hold it together. And they're really hard to get on the hook, even harder than the Ice Dub or the Diamond Dub. But they come in great colors. And you can see how shiny that stuff is. So that's the packaged kind of stuff. Oh, and the other stuff I don't have a sample for, but we've used it before, is seal fur and pseudo seal. So this is crystal seal or pseudo seal, and this is regular, actual, real seal fur. These are very fine dubbings, and again, they brush out nice. They have a really nice look to them. So I'm going to stick a hook in the vise here.
Dave?
Yeah.
Can I add to the packaged list?
Sure. Yeah.
Because of course, there is more. There are always more.
It's always
so
more.
there is
how we keep fly shops in business.
Yeah. So the basically, I don't know how well you can see my screen here.
Yeah.
So there is the semi-seal,
yeah,
which is this fairly flashy material, but it's not just pure flash. It's more of a mixed. This is
that's like the pseudo seal or the.
Yeah, it's along those lines. So it's semi-seal, whatever. It comes under different names. The other thing is, these very flashy ones that you showed earlier.
Ice Dub, laser dub. Yeah.
This is stuff you'd use in a dubbing blend. So the semi-seal already has this built in. The other source for dubbing, these are not from fly shops. See these things? If you go to a shop that sells knitting things like wool and stuff, sometimes they have fiber, just fiber for people to spin and do whatever craft things with. And these actually all came from wool shops in Victoria. Some from the what is it called, the Beehive, and some from other places. So if you have a knitting significant other, go with them to these wool shops and look around, because you might find cool looking stuff at prices much less than you would get in a fly shop. Now, of course, all of these materials are not good to use straight out of the box like that. I would only blend them with other things.
Laurent, how many of your wives' sweaters are still intact?
I don't, no, I don't touch those. The way that works is I ask for leftover stuff, and I get bits of yarn. Basically, last time I needed to tie one of Dennis's Klaksui flies. I needed some black yarn, and not the Klaksui, the other ones, the Bottle Lake. And I said, you know, where can I get some black wool? And I was told, yeah, there is a big bag of stuff. Just go and dig in there. And sure enough, there was everything I needed. So that's a good resource.
So to talk about applying some of this stuff that's a little spikier, I'll do a couple of different ones here to show you how it works. This is the Awesome Possum. You can see how it's quite fuzzy. It's got a lot of under fur in it, as well as the guard hairs. And I suspect that that's made by, you know, stripping the possum skin and then sticking it all in a blender and chopping it up. And that's what this is. So when you take the stuff out, you start again, you don't put great big whacking amounts onto the thread. What you want to do is use, let's see if I can get this so you can see better. You use small amounts. As I say, you lay it on the thread, just underneath the thread, and you roll it counterclockwise, or clockwise. If you're facing at the hook, it's clockwise, but really it's from the hook down, it's actually going on counterclockwise. So you just, because this has this short guard hairs, short fur in it, as well as the guard hairs, it actually goes on pretty well. It'll stick to the thread without too much trouble. And then, and the reason for wrapping it this way when you're facing the hook is that as you wrap your thread up the hook, it actually will go clockwise, which will tend to unwind what you put on. So every once in a while, if you've got a whole string of this, what you want to do is just give it another couple of little twists to keep that stuff tight. And then sometimes if you don't pay attention, you'll find that your thread is unwound. So then you let your bobbin hang and you spin it counterclockwise just to tighten it up. And what that does is that holds that stuff together when you're wrapping. And again, if you don't put it too thick, that gives you the ability to taper the body as you're wrapping it. And I'll take that off. And there, so that's gives you some idea what that looks like. And then you need, to finish the fly up, you need another little tool. And it's called a dubbing teaser. And it's just a piece of the hook side of the Velcro with a on a popsicle stick. Then all you do is you just pick at this stuff with that, And you can see right away how it spikes out quite nicely.
Well, Dave, I bought the expensive brass one of those from down Robinson's one day.
Yes, I have mine here somewhere. It's actually, where did it go? It was here yesterday. It's actually a little rake thing that has teeth on it. Let me see if I can find it.
That's okay.
Anyway, yeah, I've got one of those. It's just momentarily disappeared. I don't know where it's gone. Oh, there it is. Here we are. I knew it was somewhere. Yeah. So there it is. See the little
Mine has
teeth.
a piece of Velcro on it. It's just a bit different.
Yeah, and the other one is instead of the little rake on the end, it's got a piece of Velcro wrapped around the metal handle. So there's any one of those things will work to allow you to rough the dubbing up. Now the next thing we can do is do what we call a dubbing loop to stuff dubbing in. And we use that for stuff. Whoop, I'm knocking things. That's for stuff that is has got more long fibers and not a lot of lightweight fibers. And what that does is that makes it awfully hard to get onto the hook. So we do a dubbing loop. And so you take about 4 to 6 inches of thread, you pull it out from the hook, and then you bring your bobbin back up and you wrap it around the hook where your thread just left the hook. That leaves this loop of thread. Let me change out this thread to black. It'll be a little easier to see. Just throw it a half inch in here so it doesn't unravel on me. This black thread's a little thicker, so you'll be able to see that better against the background. So I'm going to just put the black thread on the hook, wrap it back. Oh, and one of the things you want to think about with thread too, thread color can be important because the thread will, depending on the dubbing, the thread will show through the dubbing. And sometimes if you have a contrasting color thread to what the dubbing is, then you'll get a highlight of a thread color that you'll see through the dubbing. So that's something to think about, is try and think about the color of thread that you have in addition to the color of dubbing. And again, make that little loop, bring the thread up. Now, before you finish closing the loop, rather, there's 2 styles of these things. One is like you can hook it with a hook at the bottom, or you can use one of these little clips and clip it at the bottom. Or in the case of, as I showed before, you get these little tools like this that have 2 little humps in them. And I don't use this one much because it's a bit of a pain to use. And you're basically wrapping your thread around that little gizmo there, like that. So now you can see it's on that W portion. And it's that keeps the loop open. And then you take your much more rugged material.
Dave,
Yeah.
Dave, could you move your screen down just a bit?
This way?
Yeah, towards the bottom of the fly.
Yeah.
That's
do
better.
that.
Thank you.
It's a little hard to hold it there, but that's okay. Now, once you've got that loop formed, you want to close the loop at the top so it doesn't come undone. So what you do is you take and you wrap clockwise around the loop right up at the hook. Just once around and then wrap in behind. And what that does is that means that the loop is now secure. It's not going to slide, the extra thread is not going to slide further up and down the hook. Now I can just get my thread out of the way and let it hang. And I'll get one of these more difficult to wrap kinds of material. This has got long stringy fibers and they're really hard to spin on the thread. So what you do is you stuff this stuff into the loop. And I'm going to put a bunch of them in here. And you have to kind of guess how much to stick in the loop. Now this is if you want a real buggy looking fly, because when I get this stuff all in the loop, some of it's going to be in the loop and some of it's going to stick out. And when I get it all in there, in this particular tool, I'm then going to slide the loop off of the double hook and where the little M is, and slide it so that it now is one loop, just one hook at there. And then I will spin this like crazy. And just maybe adjust some of this in the loop a little bit, so because before it gets too tight, to make it nice and even. And then just keep spinning. And you see that it's now formed a nice little rope. And then I can wrap that rope, that came out. I can wrap that rope around the hook. And that was really unhappy. I need my hackle pliers because it came undone at the bottom. Or in the case of rotary vise, you can continue to wrap. So this did not go well. There we go. All my dubbing came down at the bottom of the loop. That's one of the hazards of that particular tool. All right. That did not go well. I'll try it again with a different material here. So I got another hook. That one will get cut clean later. Put another hook in. So one of the things you do when you dub is I like to dress the hook, because then stuff won't slide around the hook as you're applying it. So I like to cover the hook with thread. Take it back to there. And then we'll take another one of these very spiky materials that's hard to wrap. And we'll do another dubbing loop. Now what I have here is two little tools that are really quite, I really like these. They have a little wire that sticks out the front. This is weighted. It's on a bearing, so that when you have your dubbing loop formed, you just hit it with your thumb and it spins. That's the more expensive one. The cheaper one is this guy here. You can buy that. And it comes with a variety of ends that screw on. It has the hook and the other one, and it also has this little wire sprung one. You can use any one of those. I like this one here, which is a standalone spinner. It's brass. It's got these little hooks on it. So I can hook that on the one and on the other and bring it up and put it on the hook. And again, I want to go back and do one around that loop just to make it closed at the top for sure. Now the nice thing about these with these springy thingies is if I pull away from the hook, you can see if I pull away from the hook, it skinnies up the loop. What that means is that I can take these spiky materials. Let's get the thread out of here. And I'm going to throw a half hitch in here. half-inch tool with my thread at the front. I'm going to bring my bobbin rest around. This will keep the bobbin out of the way when I'm trying to put this dubbing in. So now I've got my open dubbing loop. Make sure it's open. And I'm just going to, again, take this material in here and I'm going to shove it in the dubbing loop. Now this works really good if you have a mixed dubbing that mixes long and fluffy stuff, long stuff and spiky stuff with fluffy stuff. So you can see now I can pull on this and that's going to trap that stuff really nice. It's not going to fall out of the loop. And then I'm just going to hang it down at the bottom under the hook here and I'm going to spin it. You can't really see that spinner going around. It's going around like crazy still. There we go. Now when I do, because I've done that with this spiky material, you see all the material still sticks out a fair bit. Although it's a nice rope, it's still a fuzzy rope. And now I can take my rotary vise and apply it up the shank of the hook. I'll do it right up to the eye here. Take the bobbin rest out of the way. Tie it off. And then trim it. So again, if you have a coarse dubbing material, this is going to do the job. It leaves that all that spiky material out there. And if it's difficult to take some of these materials, like particularly this Flashaboo dubbing, which has very long fibers, and I mean quite long fibers. You can see how long those fibers are in the sun. You can see how long that stuff is. That stuff is really hard to dub on the hook if you're twisting it on, but you can stuff it in these dubbing loops and line it all up before you spin. And that will work fairly well. And that's what I did with this guy here. I stuffed it all in the dubbing loop. Sun looks better out there. And spun it on with a dubbing loop. And then I didn't have the trouble of trying to get it on the hook. Again, once you got this material on, you just have to pick at it a little bit and you can get a nice fuzzy body. And unfortunately, let's see if we can get a little more symmetry. There we go. That's a little better. You can see that how spiky that is. And it's got a really good glint to it in the sun. You can have some, in addition to that, you can have some aids that help you attach this material to the thread, and that's wax. Now, I would not use wax on wet flies because the wax will have a tendency to repel water, and then the fly doesn't sink properly. But you can get this stuff. I've had this around for a while. It's I think this is a commercial wax. It's not beeswax. And then there's I have this stuff here. It's professional dubbing fly tying dubbing wax, and this is pretty gooey stuff. It's quite sticky. You don't want to get it on your fingers too much because then everything you touch to has dubbing wax on it. And this is a loon product, low tax wax, and it's quite a bit harder, and so I haven't used that one much at all. It's just a little bit too hard. stuff I have used is I bought in like 1967. That's a mixture of beeswax and other wax. And I've had that for a very long time. And if I'm using wax, this is the stuff I'll use for the most part. It's a natural product. It sticks. It's quite sticky. Now, for that, I don't have the material for do that. For that, you use that for very, very finely chopped material, where you attach your thread to the hook and then you rub the wax onto the thread, and then you just dab the dubbing material onto the thread, and the wax will cause it to adhere to the thread. And that allows you to make a body without having to twist the dubbing material on.
So, Dave, one of the things for those people who are cross-country skiers, they used to have all kinds of different waxes depending on the conditions, and some of those waxes are really sticky and can be used for this purpose as well. So
Yep. I think that's what this one is. I think that's actually a ski wax that's been used for that purpose.
Oh, Clister, still have some kicking around.
Yeah. Well,
Oh,
clister.
don't use clister, because
Clister
once you
even
get
worse.
that on your fingers, it never comes off.
Exactly. Yeah.
Stay away. Clister is evil. If you see anywhere that, if somebody gives it to you for free, give it back.
I have a couple of other ones that I have used. This is a fairly common product this is a hare's ear dubbing. And this is taken off bunny face, the face of a rabbit. And it's a mixture of the long guard hairs and the short shuff fur. Now, if you're making a traditional hare's ear nymph, you actually get the hair mask. I should have brought one in. And you can take the longer fibers, clip them out, and use them for the tail. And then you make a mix of the under fiber and the longer fibers and chop them up with a pair of scissors. And you apply that. And I'll show you how to do that in a second here. That comes in a package pre-done.
Dave, there's a hair mask.
Yep.
Anybody wants it?
Yep.
Okay.
So you see the long grayish stuff. You can use that stuff for a tail, like the little markings, the brown markings. And you just pinch it, pull those little long fibers out, use that for the tail. And then you chop a bunch out and then mix it all up. And I'll show you to do that in a sec here. And another one is Angora goat. That's a very fine fiber. It's great for doing dry flies. It's a little bit water repellent because it's a goat. And then this is why our friend Dennis Southwick is a real fan of this stuff. He makes leeches with it. That's llama fur. And he's famous for tying llama leeches with a little red bead on the front.
Dave, have you tried the mohair thread?
No, yes, actually, as a matter of fact, we're talking dubbing. Well, it comes pre-done.
Yeah.
It comes on a spool, and there's a couple of those products, and I have used those, and yeah, that's quite effective.
It's actually interesting. It's from South Africa.
It saves a lot of prep time.
Sure does.
This is a squirrel, or what's left of him. We have a couple in our backyard here. When they start digging in the flower pots, I would like to get one and chop them up. So I'm going to show you what I do to mix these dubbing. You can see that in here, there's fine stuff in here down at the bottom that is very soft and fine material. And then, of course, there's all these guard hairs out here. And then there's some little bit different colored guard hairs out on the edge. So if I'm going to mix my own squirrel dubbing, I will take a couple of chunks out of the hide. And I'm going to mix it with some of the white stuff. I just clipped it off the pelt. And then I'll take it in my hands and I will mix it up a bit like this. Just mix it a bit. Now this stuff would have to go in a dubbing loop because it's so spiky. But if I don't want to do that, what I'll do is I'll take my scissors and I'll put it in the palm of my hand and I'll just chop it up with a pair of scissors. So if I'm just doing 1 or 2 flies with this material, or half a dozen, say, I will do this for a bit.
Hey, Dave, do you ever use a little coffee grinder?
Well, that's what Florin was going to talk about.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, you can do that, but I think it's a waste of a coffee grinder. Unless you
That's
have,
why I'm not using a coffee grinder. That's what I'm going to show you.
yeah. The coffee grinder not only mixes it, but it chops it up. And for me, the chopping, you can determine how spiky and choppy you want by how often you chop at this with your scissors. And you can blend the colors the way you want by just mixing them by hand. I'm going to get another hook in the vise here. I'm going to put my hooks. Where did I put my hooks? There we are. And this I'm not going to bother using a dubbing loop for, but I am going to use just a touch of wax to make it a little easier. Stick the hook in. And once again, I'll use a black thread so it's a little easier to see up against the background. And another thing, again, I've talked to beginners about this. When I start my thread at the front of the fly, I always attach it by wrapping back over the tag to hold it. And then I will make a couple of wraps right where the eye joins the shank of the hook, because there's a little gap there when they round the eye round. And that can, if you're fishing with a fine tippet, the tippet can get in there and get abraded and it will break off. Now, if I hold the tag end up like that when I'm wrapping, if I don't apply too much pressure with the bobbin, see how the thread that I'm holding up forces the thread I'm wrapping around down onto the hook. And that allows me to make those touching turns with if I don't have all the dexterity necessary to keep them that close together. So now I'm going to take my good old 1967 beeswax. I'm just going to rub a little bit on the thread here. I'm going to take my squirrel fur dubbing and I'm going to take a little bit at a time and just do a light spin. And you see how easy that sticks with the wax. It does, wax does help hold it to the thread. And you'll also, I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but you'll also see how the black thread shows through the brown dubbing. Again, you want to be careful what thread color you choose, depending on what effect you want to create at the end of the day. And I'll get about 3 or 4 inches of that. That's one of the problem with the wax is it sticks to your fingers. We'll get the magnifier again. And then we'll just use the rotary vise to wrap it up the shank here. So I can play around with it once it's on the hook. I can slide the material up and down the thread and make the thread a little bit thicker or thinner, the dubbing. And then I'm just going to end there. Pull the excess off. I'm just going to very quickly get a half hitch on there. Don't need to finish. And again, I'll get my little dubbing teaser. And because I've got long and short fibers mixed in, you can see I can play at this thing to get them to stick out really nice. So that's a squirrel body, squirrel dubbing body. So that's basically it for me for what dubbing stuff that I know. And then Florin's going to show you how he mixes up and blends dubbing. Natural.
Okay. Thank you, Dave.
Oh yeah, before I go, just the other stuff you can, if you have things like mink and fox and other materials like that, that's how you do that. You mix that stuff all up together and apply it to the thread. Good.
Okay. Well, there's still a few more things to say about dubbing. I mean, we could go on and on and on, but I guess there should be a limit to this, right? You guys have, I've done this at least twice already, so I'm not going to go back and do this all over again. Remember dubbing brushes, right? So you can use one of these dubbing blocks, and then you can make a pile of dubbing brushes with these all these long fibered coarse materials that Dave was talking about. This is where dubbing brushes are very handy for that kind of stuff. Anything that's like really hard to handle. And you can do these dubbing brushes both with thread and with wire. Wire is, to me, the preferred choice because you get a stiff and it keeps its shape and it's easy to wrap on the hook. It can be done with thread as well. They don't, they're a little bit trickier to do. I don't know if you can, I need to show you here. So this is one done with thread. They're not easy to store. You kind of have to come up with a storage system for that, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So that's another option. And before I launch into how to make your own dubbing and how to mix it, I just wanted to point out a couple of references that some of you might find useful. Okay, now I need to shift this around so you can actually read. No. Okay. It's one of these games where, okay. So here are three pretty good books to have if you don't already have them. So this one is the original Licensing wet fly tying book. And the reason I bring this book up is that it's the first reference that I have to making dubbing brushes. So he has a whole chapter dedicated to dubbing brushes, and it's basically, it's an old book. It's from the 1940s, and so there are very few pictures to illustrate. But it's all, if you want to go old school and do everything basically with your hands and little else, this is the book to get, and it's a lot of fun. If that is too much of a headache, there is this wonderful new book or newer book by a guy named Alan McGee. There he is. And he has got a whole description of doing a lower tech dubbing block, but he follows licensing. So he first reiterates everything in Licensing's book about doing these dubbing loops by hand, and then he goes on to explain how you can how you could make a simple dubbing block with just a piece of wood and a few nails. I haven't tried his particular version of the dubbing block because I already have one, but it's a resource you can look up these sorts of things. And he also goes into explaining materials and choice of fur, for example, on a hair mask, which I'm going to get to in a moment. Another book that goes a little bit into this is Charlie Craven's Basic Fly Tying, which I mentioned earlier. And he does go into explaining how to do your own dubbing when he goes into showing you how to tie a hare's ear nymph. And that's where I picked up this idea for mixing the dubbing. Okay, so here's a hair mask in natural, and here's a hair mask dyed olive. And I've cut, this is somewhat laborious if you want to do larger quantities. I've cut a little clump of the olive from pretty much in the center of the mask. So this is the hair that's kind of like between the eyes. So this is longer, fluffier hair. It's still pretty dark and has nice markings, as opposed to the hair on the ears themselves, where you can find a lot of nice dark hair, but not as much of this fluff. As you cut it off the skin, this clump isn't much use. So you can do one or two things. You can do what Dave showed you and fluff it up in your hands to get it more even. Or you can use a coffee grinder. And I've tried that, and all I ended up was kind of a clumpy mess. So I wasn't very, very happy. And then I just kind of gave up. It was an old coffee grinder that nobody was using, so nothing lost there. And then I found out this idea from Charlie Craven. So what's the whole idea? Well, you take your clump of fur and you put it in a little Ziploc bag into which you've poked some holes with a dubbing needle. Okay, so this is a bag with holes in it. And then you get a can of compressed air. Right? Next, you take the nozzle of the compressed air can and you put it in your bag, and then you zip the bag all the way and just leave a little hole there for the nozzle. Okay. And then what you want to do is, I'm trying to hold this under the camera so you can actually see. Just give it a few blasts of air. And as you can see, you're creating a swirl of air here that turns around your dubbing and fluffs it up in the process as well. Okay, now your dubbing is all fluffed up and ready to use. So if I take it out of this bag, you're going to see it's all. So now I have to be careful because there's static, electricity, and all that good stuff. Here I got myself from that little
problem in Edmonton in winter is static, which we don't have here in Victoria.
Yeah. So I don't know to what extent it does help to fluff up the dubbing, but as you can see, I turned that clump of not very inspiring looking dubbing into something that is now useful. And at this point, you can start to play with, maybe you want this to be a little sparkly, right? So then for example, I can take some of this ice dub stuff and get a few fibers in there. And I have to decide how much I want of this. A little goes a long way. So maybe this feels like a right mix. Take the thing, put it back in the bag, put the air in, zip it. Okay. And give it a good whirl here. Now you don't want these bags to be too small because then there's no room for the dubbing to move in. I've tried it with smaller bags and it doesn't work. So this is about a 3x3 or 4x4 inch size bag. And here's the, it sticks now, of course, it's got more opportunity to build up static electricity. Isn't that great? So here is the dubbing with a bit of sparkly accent to it, okay? So at this point, you can just, let your imagination run wild and do whatever you want. Another way to achieve some olive flavor to dubbing is you take regular gray, so natural kind of gray tan hare's ear and mix a little bit of yellow in it. And what you're gonna get out of that is a slightly olive colored dubbing. Very nice stuff. Okay, so, and this one can be used, take a smaller Ziploc bag like this. I put a little piece of white card in there, so it shows me the colors a little better and it stores nicer. And just stick it in there, and this is ready to tie, ready to be tying flies with. Okay, so that's the mixing of dubbing. And you can do this with, that's how I mix, for example, things like seal fur. If I want to add a good way to do leeches is take black seal fur and mix either some, sparkly red dubbing or some of that semi-seal. Either the there's a semi-seal that comes in red, which is quite sparkly, or there's a pre-mixed black and red, which you can add to black seal fur, and that gives a very good color. So that's the mixing of the dubbing. I was supposed to tie a fly as well, but I don't know if there's time for that. Will I tie a fly as well on the theme of?
It's a quick fly to tie. It's just copper wire and hare's ear.
I could do that, or I could do, to kind of stick with this theme of, yeah. So we listed the copper.
Hare and copper.
The hare and copper. Yeah. Okay. Sure. We could do a hare and copper. Let me try to do the get a camera again here. That's gonna take a little bit of time. Just a moment. Okay. So here's this is on a small hook here. This is a size 14 with a bead on it already. Oh, I'm not sharing yet. How about that? Share. And I need to probably do the focus here. Okay. So we have a hook, we have a bead. And now I need a little bit of thread. I'm just going to use some brown thread for this. It's a uni 8/0. And for this fly, you can do it with or without tails. And what I like to use for tail on this is just a little bit of this mottled hen back.
Yeah, your
So I'm
camera's
just-
not showing.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, we can't see your camera's not showing. We're just seeing you.
John, can you stop highlighting me and just let me screen share?
I see the vice.
I've got the vice.
I don't.
I don't.
No.
Okay, because I'm screen sharing and you should be able to see.
I've got spotlight off. You just should go to speaker view in the top right. There's a button.
Yeah. So can you guys see my screen share?
Yep. No. Seeing you.
No.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, well
I
then,
think we got 2 or 3 of us that can see it. and
I see your screen share.
I don't.
I don't know what else I could.
You can click on, if you top
Good
right,
for me now.
speaker view. Switch to speaker view.
Who?
Anybody who can't see Florin's vice.
I can't. All I've got is he's got screen share up and I'm seeing the Golden Rods logo.
Oh, that's seriously weird. Let me stop share and try again. Share screen.
Now I got it.
Now
There we
you
go.
got it. Okay, so it was probably a glitch at my end. Okay, so I take a little one of these feathers. I pull a few fibers off the feather for a tail. No counting of fibers required. Measure it to about 3/4 hook length and attach it at the tail end of the fly. Okay. The next thing I want here is I want the copper rib. I'm going to attach the copper wire. So this is brassy size copper wire, so it's fairly fine. And I like to put a decent length of wire going back all the way to the bead so that it doesn't give me humps on the hook. Okay, and now I'm going to use some of the dubbing that I just mixed, sparkle and all. Now this is reasonably spiky stuff. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to go without wax or anything. I'm just going to take some of this dubbing and I'm going to put it on the thread and just lightly spin it. Okay. Kind of judge. A couple of inches is probably more than enough. This is a small size fly, right? So I've got it on my thread. Now this thing doesn't stick all that well to the thread. So whenever you run into this situation where the dubbing doesn't stick very well, and the material I was going to demonstrate is silver. Silver is very springy, and you can try to twist it on a thread, but you can't twist it very well. So what I do in all of these situations is I take my rotary hackle pliers. So this is a pair of rotary hackle pliers. I grab the thread at the end of where I dubbed, as you can see here. Move everything to my left hand and hold it there so it doesn't slip out. And then form a dubbing loop. Okay. So now I can do everything that Dave showed earlier. Just close the dubbing loop nicely with my thread. Make sure it's all secure. And then move the thread to the head of the hook. So now all I have to do is I give it a good twist with my hackle pliers, and I directly start wrapping. So any material that's reluctant to get spun on the thread is going to be trapped in the dubbing loop, and you're going to have it on there nice and secure. Okay. And then as you wrap forward, you can try to shape the fly, give it a bit of a taper here. Go all the way behind the bead. Whoops. Sometimes this thing slips out if you're too enthusiastic about pulling on it. Okay, so now I reached behind the bead. I secure the last bit of the dubbing loop, which is just pure thread at this point. And then the body is done. And then to finish off the fly, this is very straightforward. Just take the copper wire and counterwind so that if you want the wire to be very visible, you just go in the opposite direction you went with the dubbing. Okay, and secure this behind the bead with a few wraps, then pull this back, put the thread over, and helicopter the wire away, which if it's copper usually works. Okay. At this point, the fly is done. All you need to do is whip finish behind the bead, 1 whip finish, 2 whip finishes. Done. If you feel that this is not quite buggy enough, popsicle tool comes to the rescue. Give it a bit of a brush, and the dubbing is going to stick out very nicely. Okay. So this is my favorite way of doing dubbing loops. If I'm doing anything else other than leeches, and when I do leeches, I prefer to use dubbing brushes, as I showed you earlier, because once I have the dubbing brushes pre-made, I can just sit down and tie 100 leeches before, certainly before I get bored. So that's it, almost on time.
Well done.
Thank you, Florin.
Any questions?
Thank you, Florin. That's a great idea.
Okay. That's great, guys. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I do have, Dennis here, I do have some further helpful hints on Kluksui. I just like to pass on if anybody wants to hang in for another 5 minutes or so.
Yeah, Dennis, can I just one last thing before I forget about this. I talked to Don Anderson on Wednesday night.
Well, I still feel kind of upset, but
And he has a talk on fly tying tools that he'd like to present. And they've thought that this could be a suitable topic for a Saturday session. Are you guys interested? I'm just putting that out so that you can think about it.
Sure. Yeah.
That would be great.
Okay.
Sounds
So
like
I'll
a good
contact
idea.
Don back. He couldn't make it today. He would have liked to, but he had something else going. But he said next Saturday he would be free.
oh, where, no.
That's good.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, Dennis.
No, that's good. That's good. This will be fast and furious. Just a few things I want to bring your attention to. This is my fly tying vest, or my fly vest, fishing vest. And you can see I have my forceps there. And I've lost several pairs of forceps at Kleksui in one way or another. So I've attached it to a stretchable string there. So it's always handy. The other thing that's really handy, and you're going to need at Kleksui, is a finger guard for stripping guard. And when I'm not using it, I actually store it on my forceps so that I don't lose it. So it's sort of stuck there on my forceps, just storing it there. Now, what I wanted to get at mostly was when you're out fishing and you decide to keep some fish, but you want to continue fishing, you've got a few options. Option number one is, instead of going back to camp or bringing your fish back every time you catch one, is to have some way of carrying it or storing it. And what I normally do is you can use a rope or a tether and just have it create a stringer. And as you're wading in knee deep or waist deep, drag it along with you. But what you'll find is that using this, you'll have to keep adjusting the length depending how deep of water you are and how fast you're traveling. And the other disadvantage of this is that in carrying the fish back to camp, it actually digs into your hand, especially if you have 2 or 3 fish. So what I normally do is I use a strap. I found myself just a cloth strap. And I feed it through the fish's gills and mouth. And when I'm carrying the fish, I wrap the strap around my wrist.
Let's see it
this way. So that doesn't dig into my hand when I'm carrying the 2 or 3 fish. So if you've got 1 or 2 fish on a stringer and you don't want to drag it along with you, what most guys do is they'll take they'll put it on shore and just leave them there and just keep an eye on the tide so that your fish don't wash away. But when you're doing that, what happens is the seagulls start coming in. So what most guys use is they'll take their fish, put them on the strap, and put them in a plastic bag and leave them up on shore. And that way they can fish and it's not dragging behind them or getting in their way. But you have to, number one, you have to make sure you know where the tide is coming in or out. And you want to keep an eye on your fish so that you don't wander too far away from them. So if you're going to another area, you got to go pick up your fish and take it with you. But more important than anything is using this plastic bag, make sure it's white, bright white, because it's easy to lose sight of your fish if it's in a black plastic bag sitting on the shore. Now these plastic bags, one I use, they're quite big. And some clothing stores or other stores will hand out these. They're a little heavy duty. So you've got 2 or 3 fish sitting on the beach in a plastic bag and it's time to go back to the campsite. You can carry them back. If the bag is heavy enough, you can use the handles on the bag, but most of the time I just use the strap, wrap the strap around my wrist. At Kleksui, they've got 2 cleaning stations, one at each end. They've got hoses there, and so you might want to carry a knife with you to stop off the cleaning station before you go back to the campsite.
generally what I do is I take all my gear, my rods, reels, everything, and bring it back to the campsite. Then I go back to the cleaning station with my cleaning knife and a couple of bags or whatever I'm going to need, clean my fish, and then I bring them back to the campsite. Now, if you want to keep your fish and bring them home, the fisheries officers have to be able to identify what species they are. So what I normally do is I'll bring them back to the campsite after I've cleaned them, put them on a cutting board, and I'll slice them up into about 1 inch or 1.5 inch steaks without the head. And I'll leave the tail on. And I'll put them in one fish in each bag. So that's a whole fish in there. The other options, I know one gentleman actually brings a freezer with him. And I've mentioned using the freezers at the campsite, and they're not very secure because they've been pilfered a lot. So leave room in your freezer at your campsite, either in your refrigerator or a separate freezer to store them. You can get ice at the campsite. They sell ice there. And what I've done in the past is I've actually taken my fish, say you're allowed 4-day, 2-day limit. And if you got someone with you with 2 licenses, you ended up with 16 fish, pinks. I've managed to get them to the cannery in Nanaimo. But recently I've heard that they're under new management and their quality isn't as good as it used to be. However, I have heard that there is another cannery either in Port McNeil or Port Hardy that's also reasonably good. So check that out if you want to have them canned. I normally have mine smoked, canned, and boneless and skinless. And what they do is after they're done processing them, they'll ship them down to Victoria to Island Outfitters, and you just go down there and pick them up. I think that's about all I have. The other thing I carry in the back of my vest is a rain hat. I usually use a baseball cap when I'm fishing, except if it's really sunny, then I'll use a wide brim hat. But if it does start to rain and you want to keep your head dry, one of the options is most fishing jackets have a hood, and you can pull it up over your head and over your hat. But what I find with that is that I can't see in back of me or to this side that well. And I can't hear that well. And when I'm out there, especially when I'm alone, I want to be able to see and hear in back of me a lot, especially early in the morning in the fog because of bears. So I wear a hat, a rain hat, and it's just a floppy Gore-Tex rain hat that just folds up. And I'll slip that on, and that'll keep the rain off the back of my neck, my face, and everything else. But then I can still see around me. My vision and my hearing is still there. Anyway, that's all I can think of right now, guys. Any questions about that?
Hey, Dennis, that's great tips. One question on the stripping guards. What are you making those out of, and where are you getting the material?
You purchase them actually at fly fishing stores normally. I find that it's absolutely necessary. And in fact, this year at Soup River, I had to use 2 of them because my middle finger was getting burnt also.
Yeah. Robinson's has them.
Yeah.
You can buy them incredibly cheaply on AliExpress as finger guards. An alternative to, on the Eve River, the way I've seen.
You're breaking up, frozen.
anglers keep their fish is they actually cling bag or a laundry bag, and they put that in their fly vest with some either usually rope and a float. When they catch their fish, they put it in the mesh bag and put a rock or two inside the mesh bag to sink everything. And they submerge the fish, and there's a float that's visible, so they know where it is. And then they carry on fishing. And this keeps their fish cold, and it's visible from a distance where they're, with a float. And then when they come back, they just lift the bag out of the water, take the rocks out, the fish drain, and then they might put it into a plastic bag, or some people just actually kind of drag the mesh bag behind them as they fish their way back up to the trail. But anyway, that's just an alternative.
Where do they get the mesh bag from?
I think you can buy a mesh bag from likely the dollar store, and it's a clothing bag. It's for laundry.
Yeah. So I had a mesh bag this summer that I bought from Amazon for taking fins, from snorkeling fins.
Yeah.
It was heavy duty, but it still got tore up with 2 or 3 fish in it from the Campbell each time. So it's a goner.
You can get a good goodie bag from any scuba diving shop.
Yeah, that's where I got mine from, was the scuba diving.
And it has a nice wire mouth that snaps close.
Anyway, that's all I have for today, guys.
A great session. Thanks so much.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks, gents.
Okay, see you next time.